In my parents' house, for as long as I can remember, the same thing has always sounded, Jessica this and Jessica that, as if they had no other children at all, as if their whole world revolved exclusively around her, their shining star, their pride, their perfect daughter. And while I was like a shadow against the background of this perfect portrait, Jessica couldn't do anything wrong, never, under any circumstances. At least not while I was around to unwittingly take on everything that didn't fit into their idea of a family idol. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy watching. I got used to it so early that I even stopped being surprised. It has always been so, in every memory from my childhood, in every family photo where I stand to the side, a little in the shadow, with an uncertain smile and slightly hunched shoulders. This unspoken but immutable rule is felt. Jessica is the heroine, I'm the statistician. To most of my friends and colleagues, I'm Olivia, although my friends call me Tori. And at the age of 27, when, it would seem, adult life should have already put everything in its place, I suddenly realized that I had accepted it. I've come to terms with being a minor figure in the Carter family, a role that I've been forced into since birth and that I've never really learned to reject. And yet, despite the fact that, in the opinion of my parents, I was almost a disappointment, my life was developing quite well. I had a stable job as a corporate account manager at Techfear Decision. I earned good money, stood confidently on my feet, and built my future step by step, although none of them, of course, ever admitted this out loud. Last year, I rented a cozy, pretty house in Meadowbrook, a quiet, green suburb that could be reached from the city center in half an hour without traffic jams. The house smelled of lavender and fresh coffee. I had a small terrace and a favorite armchair by the window, where I read in the evenings and sometimes wrote in a diary. I even had a savings account, which grew every month, and which I carefully replenished. These were my savings for the down payment on my own home, my personal little victory. Jessica, who was 30 at the time, had already married her college boyfriend, Ryan, 3 years ago. The wedding was loud, expensive, and tasteless, not my type, however, but my parents were thrilled. They didn't spare a cent. The dress, the banquet, the photographer, the live music, everything was on a grand scale, and, of course, I was the bridesmaid. I got a peach-colored dress that didn't suit me at all, neither my skin tone, nor my figure, nor my temperament. I'm still sure that Jessica chose it precisely because she knew how ridiculous I would look in it. In her eyes, I was just a backdrop, and the backdrop wasn't particularly spectacular. Today was a family dinner, Tuesday morning. When I sat down at the table to drink coffee before work, my mother wrote a message, short, without greetings and unnecessary words. Don't be late. Like last time, I sighed, staring at my phone screen. These monthly dinners have long been a torment for me, an obligation that I couldn't get rid of because of some kind of obsessive sense of duty, almost like from a school curriculum. If you want to, you don't want to, but you have to, I answered briefly, I'll be there, and went back to preparing for the morning meeting with clients. That evening, after dark, I turned onto a familiar street and saw a shiny new SUV near my parents' house, Jessica's. Of course, her red car always looked like an advertising picture, and I thought that since she was here, she was probably helping her mom in the kitchen, earning more points for her beloved child. The dinner followed a familiar pattern. Mom asked Jessica questions about her work at the real estate agency, chatted, laughed at her jokes, and Dad nodded approvingly, as if her every phrase was a revelation. I sat across from him, picking at my food with a fork, not feeling the taste, and answered questions only when they were addressed directly to me, and as briefly as possible. I knew how things would go from here. I knew they'd saved the main thing for dessert. And indeed, when the pie arrived, Jessica cleared her throat, theatrically, loudly, to attract attention. Then she looked at all of us, Mom, Dad, Ryan, and me. We have wonderful news, she said, and I was already mentally preparing for the pregnancy announcement. I could almost hear a picture forming in my head. Pregnant Jessica, her parents in ecstasy, her first grandchild, another crown for her head, another comparison in which I would lose again. But no, we decided to open our own business, she said, taking Ryan's hand. The parents beamed. Mom even clapped her hands, exclaiming, "Oh, darling, this is wonderful." She was really delighted. What kind of business? She asked with interest. Jessica was beaming. Luxury clothing boutique, she said with such inspiration, as if it were not just an idea, but a revelation from above. We found the perfect room in the city center, she added, and only then did I really listen. The city center, boutique, it was serious. I frowned. I have a degree in business management. I know what it costs to start a business from scratch, and what it requires. I worked hard while I was studying. I wrote term papers at night, studied cases, defended projects. Jessica, on the other hand, barely passed the exam for a realtor's license, and then only on the third attempt. I couldn't just keep quiet. Have you conducted a market analysis? I asked in a flat voice, trying not to sound too stern. Retail in the city center is not a walk in the park, there is serious competition there. Jessica rolled her eyes, as if I was spoiling her mood again. Don't start, Tori, not everyone needs to think about everything as much as you do. I felt a knot tighten inside me. I wasn't exaggerating, these were basic, normal business issues. Have you calculated the initial investments? Projected income? When are you planning to break even? I continued, still trying to stay calm, but Jessica snapped back. That's why no one likes to talk to you, you're always messing with your boring numbers. She didn't even try to hide her annoyance. You don't know anything about fashionable clothes, it's my passion. She straightened up, her face beaming with determination. And anyway, there's something else. First, we need capital. There was such a tense silence in the room that I could almost hear the spring snap in the old wall clock in the dining room, and that was the only sound that broke the frozen air. Something inside me ached, as if someone had gently but insistently pressed an icy palm to my stomach. I knew, felt with my whole body, that something was about to happen, after which there would be no turning back. Jessica, without taking her eyes off our parents, sighed, as if she were playing on stage, and said, with exaggerated gentleness in her voice, we were hoping that you could help us a little, maybe take out a mortgage on a house? Just until business takes off, then we will return everything, with interest, of course, it's reliable. I literally felt my jaw drop down by itself. They really said it. They actually asked their parents to mortgage the house that Jessica and I grew up in, the house that they had been paying off for 30 years, the house that, as far as I knew, was almost fully paid off. This is a terrible idea, came out of my mouth before I could turn on the filter. My eyes darted between Mom and Dad's faces, trying to find at least a glimmer of doubt, at least a shadow of common sense, but both of them were silent, staring at Jessica with the same expression with which they once looked at her in a school play when she played Cinderella: pride, admiration, and complete, unconditional faith. You can't risk your home for a business that hasn't even started yet, I added, trying to keep my voice calm, though my voice was trembling treacherously, especially in the retail business, where the failure rate is off the charts. Jessica, who had been calm and collected until now, suddenly shuddered and clenched her fists. It won't fail. Stop it, she shouted, and her voice broke. God, Tori, you're just jealous because Ryan and I are taking risks and believing in our dreams. And you're hiding behind your dreary office job, afraid to put something real on the line for once. I asked, not believing my ears. I exhaled slowly, not looking up from her face. I'm trying to protect our parents from being homeless. It's called caring. Jessica tried to understand, but she didn't hear it anymore. Her voice became louder, sharper, almost hysterical. No. You just don't want me to succeed. You've always been jealous of me. Since childhood. You can't stand the idea that I can succeed and earn more than you with your vaunted business degree. I watched her eyes fill with tears, those crocodile tears that she had been honing for years, at rehearsals, in conversations with her parents, in front of guys, with teachers, her signature weapon, and this time it worked. I saw my mother tense up, and my father's face became sad and depressed, as if someone had pulled all the air out of him. I got up from the table, pushing my chair back with a bang. This is ridiculous, I said, barely able to contain my anger. I'm not going to sit here and be accused of things I didn't do or feel. I looked at my parents. Mom, Dad, please, think carefully, don't rush into decisions. This is serious. We'll do that, dear, Mom said, but there was a cool hardness in her voice, and I immediately realized that she had already decided which side to be on. I said goodbye, barely looking at them, ignored Jessica and Ryan, and walked to the exit, feeling my shoulders tighten with every step. On the way home, I couldn't get rid of the feeling of bitterness that was spreading in my chest like an acid stain. I knew what would happen next. Jessica will cry, Jessica will talk you into it, and they will give up. And, as always, I'll turn out to be angry, callous, overly rational, bad because I'm trying to prevent a catastrophe. 3 weeks later, right during an important work presentation, when I was standing at the projector and explaining to a group of potential partners the calculations for automating the customer base, my phone rang. I ignored the first call, but when it happened again immediately, with the same number, I apologized, left my colleagues with the printouts, and went out into the hallway. "Hi, Olivia." Her father's voice came on the line. He called me by my full name, which was extremely rare, and there was something heavy in his voice, as if he was carrying a bag of stones on his shoulders. We gave Jessica and Ryan money, for business." I closed my eyes and leaned against the cold wall, taking a deep breath. "How much?" I asked. There was a pause. "We have refinanced the house, 200,000. I slowly lowered my head. "Jesus, Dad," he hurriedly added, "it's going to be okay. They have a solid business plan. Jessica showed us everything." I bit my tongue to keep from saying what I really thought. Instead, I said, "I hope everything will work out," and without adding a word, she hung up the phone and returned to the presentation, feeling her throat constrict with impotent irritation. Almost a year has passed since they mortgaged the house. At 11 o'clock in the evening, on a very ordinary Tuesday, when I was sitting on the couch with a laptop and sorting through work documents, lazily finishing my tea, my doorbell suddenly rang. My heart skipped a beat. No one just comes in at this hour. I got up, went to the door, and, opening it, froze. My parents were standing on the threshold, and they looked as if they had suddenly aged 10 years. Mom, with her eyes swollen from crying, trembling lips. Dad, hunched over, tired, with an empty look that only happens to people who no longer see a way out. "We lost the house," Mom whispered, and her voice trembled so that I almost did not hear the words. I wanted to say, "I told you so." I wanted to shout, "Why didn't you listen?" But looking at their exhausted faces, I just couldn't. "Come in," I said softly, stepping aside. That evening, when I opened the door to them, without asking unnecessary questions or allowing myself a single sarcastic remark, I took my parents into the house, which, in fact, was just my temporary shelter, but now was supposed to become their haven, and gave them an empty bedroom, the one that before I used this one as a guest room, with a neatly made bed, an antique mirror in a wooden frame, and a plaid I knitted many years ago. We hardly spoke. The silence that hung in the air was too thick and full of those words that we did not dare to utter, and even the tea that I put in the kitchen remained almost untouched. They told me the most necessary things and still managed to say almost nothing. It turned out that Jessica and Ryan's boutique, their ambitious project in which the money received from the mortgage of the parental home was invested, lasted only 8 months. They bought inventory at inflated prices, some obscure collections from little-known designers, overpaid for the rent of the premises, choosing a pretentious street in the center, which, as it turned out, they simply could not afford. Plus, there were trips to Los Angeles and New York for fashion shows, which they called necessary for inspiration, but, in fact, they were just vacations at someone else's expense, with dinners at expensive restaurants and overnight stays in hotels, the cost of which could cover the rent of a boutique for a month in advance. When the store closed and there was no more income, my parents tried to cope with the mortgage, but the payments were too high, and the bank, without waiting for a miracle, sent them a notification the same morning. The deadline had passed. The house would be withdrawn. The next day, when I woke up with a heaviness in my chest, I called my boss and, having gathered my courage, asked to be allowed to work from home at least for a while, explaining that my parents were in a difficult situation and needed help. He agreed. Fortunately, I proved myself well, and we spent the whole day picking up what little the bank allowed us to keep from our parents' house, several boxes with family photos, dresses and jackets packed in cases, a porcelain set given to my mother by her own mother for the wedding. Everything in these boxes smelled of home, the past, love, time that could not be returned. "It's temporary," Dad repeated, over and over, like a spell, as if he hoped that if he said it enough times, everything would really become temporary, until we get back on our feet. I nodded, not trusting my voice, which could slip and say too much, which would not be forgotten later. 2 weeks have passed. I was already getting used to the new rhythm of life, to the fact that now there are 2 more people in the house. Mom was quietly rustling in the kitchen in the morning, Dad was watching TV with the sound muted, I was working from the bedroom, where I set up an office. In the evening, I would come back to reality and start cooking something simple for 3. So on one of the rare working days when I had to go to the office, I returned home and, turning into the driveway, immediately saw a familiar red car, Jessica and Ryan. My stomach clenched in anticipation. I walk into the house and see Jessica sitting at the kitchen table as if she were the hostess, not the guest, and Ryan next to her, hunched over, with a dull look. "Here she is," she said with a smile that didn't have any warmth in it. I asked, putting my laptop bag on the floor. Mom appeared from the kitchen, carrying a cup of tea. "They need somewhere to live, they were evicted, they didn't pay the rent. I told them you wouldn't mind." I tried to speak calmly, even though everything inside was already shaking with rage. From the living room, without taking his eyes off the TV, his father's voice came. "We're a family, Tori, the family sticks together." I looked at my sister. She had the nerve to at least try to feign shame. I knew her well enough to understand that it was an empty facial expression. "We will help," she promised, folding her hands on the table. "I'll clean, Mom will cook, we won't give you any trouble. You won't even notice that we're here." And what was I supposed to do? Kick them out the door? Should I say, "I'm sorry, you're not welcome here"? This is my family, even if it's imperfect, even if it's destructive. I agreed, on their terms. Mom took over the cooking, Jessica started cleaning up on weekends from time to time. And I bought food for everyone, paid for utilities, and worked to keep everything afloat. Dad and Ryan didn't offer anything, not once, not a single gesture to help in any way. The first month was still bearable. I worked late into the evening, and when I got home, at least I got a hot dinner and a reasonably calm environment. We ate together, had tense conversations, and then dispersed. My parents went to the guest room. Jessica and Ryan went to the converted office, and I went to my room. The house, designed for 2 people, now accommodated 5 adults, and despite the cramped space, it somehow managed. But already in the second month, the first signs of cracks in this fragile structure began to appear. When I returned home in the evening, I saw a mountain of unwashed dishes in the sink, which no one even tried to clean. Mom suddenly decided that cooking for 5 people was too hard for a woman her age, and stopped doing it. I came in tired and hungry, and found that my parents had made soup just for themselves, and Jessica and Ryan had made pasta and salad, also just for themselves, and both dishes were made from products that I paid for. There was nothing left for me, not even bread. On the 3rd night in a row, when I opened the refrigerator and found only empty shelves and a single jar of mustard, I spat, left the house and went to a cafe near the office to have dinner alone and at least once not to feel like a stranger in my own house. These were, of course, additional expenses, unexpected, unnecessary, and even painful in recent months, but still I continued to have dinner at the cafe near the office, because it turned out to be much easier than coming home, opening the refrigerator, seeing emptiness there, and reminding myself again that no one but me, and he wasn't going to care about it. Jessica's promised weekend cleaning soon turned into a legend, one of those items that exist only in theory, on paper, or in a world where commitments mean at least a little something. Every day, she fulfilled at least some of the things she had promised less and less often, and each time there was an explanation for it, often ridiculous, but uttered with such confidence that she seemed to believe in what she was saying. She was too tired of her new part-time job at some flower shop, she had a headache, or she suddenly remembered an important meeting with friends with whom she definitely needed to establish contacts, because this, allegedly, could lead to better career opportunities. I listened to all this without interfering, but I was accumulating irritation inside, like accumulating coins in a jar. 1, 2, 3, and I knew that at some point this jar would simply burst. In the middle of the 3rd month, one cool Saturday morning, I woke up with a firm decision. No more trips to the supermarket in the morning, no filled baskets, no expenses that were consumed in the evening. Instead of putting on jeans, tying my hair in a bun and going to the store, I stayed in bed, huddled against the pillows, and took out a book from the bedside table that I still couldn't finish reading. I immersed myself in the plot, in the lives of other people's characters, in dialogues that have nothing to do with mine, in a world where justice at least sometimes prevailed. In the late afternoon, a door slammed in the hallway, voices sounded, the family had returned from some distant relatives, and almost immediately I heard my mother clomping up the stairs. She burst into my room without knocking, as if it were the right thing to do, with a face that showed indignation bordering on accusation. "There's no food in the house," she said loudly, as if it was my fault. "It's Saturday, you always go shopping on Saturdays." I slowly put the book down, noting to myself how quickly the old things return, the habit of demanding, expecting, and never thanking. "I decided not to do it today," I replied calmly, trying to keep my voice as even as possible. "And when were you going to tell us?" "We're hungry," my mother continued, as if I had violated a contract signed in blood. "I'm tired of buying products that disappear faster than I can eat them," I said. Looking straight into her eyes, "From now on, everyone can buy their own food." Mom's face instantly turned red, and the anger that had been building up in her gushed out. "After all we've done for you, did you do it for me?" I interrupted, already unable to contain the inner heat. "You live in my house, Mom. I didn't even ask for much, just for you to cook and Jessica to clean. Neither of these things are happening anymore." She flushed, turned around, and walked out of the room as fast as if I'd hit her. A few seconds later, I heard her voice merge with the voices of Dad and Jessica downstairs in the living room. Complaints, discontent, indignation. All this was growing like a thundercloud. I put on my headphones and went back to my book. I wasn't going to get involved in another pointless family argument. A week of silence has arrived. This, of course, was childish behavior on both sides, but at the same time, there was something unexpectedly peaceful about this silence. I bought myself a mini fridge and put it in the bedroom, refilled it with only my own food, as I used to do in the dorm. I'd come home from work, go into my room, and no one else would ask me what I was going to cook, buy, or discuss. No one pretended to help, and no one interfered, and yet, despite the feeling of control, I couldn't help but admit that it had become especially lonely in this house. And then one evening, when I returned home with a bag of takeaway food, my mother came up to me in the hallway. "Olivia, can we talk?" "What is it?" she asked, and when she said my full name, it always meant that the conversation was going to be serious. I nodded, took off my coat, and followed her into the kitchen. Dad, Jessica, and Ryan were already sitting at the table, and they all had the same faces that families put on when they're about to say something they hope will sound conciliatory. "We've been thinking," Mom began, looking at each of them for support. Jessica suddenly spoke up. "We want to fix everything, we know." "We failed." I raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Mom took the floor again. "We would like to return to our original agreement. I'll cook dinner. Jessica will clean up if you start buying groceries again." I looked at them, peering into their faces, and tried to figure out if they were truly remorseful, or if it was just a convenient attempt to return to old habits. Dad was looking away, Ryan was twirling a napkin in his hands, and Jessica looked, well, as always, trying too hard to pretend to be feeling. "Why the sudden change?" I asked. Mom shrugged her shoulders a little. "We miss our family, and, to be honest, none of us can afford to buy food separately." I nodded. At least it was honest, and the truth was, I was bored myself, by the smell of fresh food, by the usual household noise, by the feeling that you are not just living with someone under the same roof, but are close, even if not without arguments. And yes, the silence, despite the apparent harmony, was also a kind of loneliness. "Okay," in the end, I agreed, not because they convinced me or because I believed in the sincerity of their repentance, but because I just wanted at least some peace, at least temporary peace inside these four walls, where no one had felt truly at home for a long time. But I immediately set a condition, firmly and clearly, looking everyone in the eye. "If everything goes back to what it was, that's it. I will not allow myself to be used in my own home." Everyone nodded eagerly, almost with relief, as if I had overturned the death sentence. And so, without unnecessary scenes, we returned to our old agreement, as if all these weeks of tense silence and accumulating discontent had not happened. Surprisingly, everything went really smoothly for a few weeks. Mom cooked, not every day, but regularly, richly, deliciously, with the very smell that I remembered from childhood, when she conjured in the kitchen on Sundays. Oddly enough, Jessica actually cleaned on weekends, as if she were trying to clean not only the floor, but also our family history, and I, as before, filled the refrigerator, kept track of the bills, balanced between work and this fragile, almost illusory balance. Of course, we didn't suddenly look like the perfect Brady family from an old sitcom, but at least we managed not to touch each other with sharp edges. One evening, at the very beginning of November, When the air had already become pungent and the shadows outside the windows began to fall earlier, I returned home, parked the car next to the garage and immediately felt something strange and elusive but tangible change in the atmosphere. The light was on in the kitchen, and as I passed by, I saw that Mom, Dad, Jessica, and Ryan were already sitting at the table. They were talking and laughing, but when I entered, the conversation suddenly stopped, and their eyes seemed to take turns glancing at me while I hung up my coat and washed my hands. I asked, sitting down at the table. Mom put a plate of lasagna in front of me. She made it herself. It was evident by the neatly browned crust and subtle aroma. She was smiling too broadly, tightly, like an actress in an amateur production. "We were just discussing Thanksgiving," she said cheerfully. "He's coming very soon. There are just over 2 weeks left." "Okay," I nodded, accepting the plate. "I'll have to work the day before, but on Thanksgiving itself, I can help with the cooking." With these words, an invisible current passed through the table again. Glances, almost synchronously, met each other again, as if there was some kind of plan in this. And suddenly Jessica put down her fork and, with her usual forced gentleness, said, "Actually, we were thinking of doing something different this year." I frowned, the question already hanging in the air. "Just a little vacation," she continued, "to unwind, to rest a little after everything that happened." I didn't even have time to ask a question, as Dad suddenly became animated. "There is a wonderful resort in Sedona. They have a special Thanksgiving program there, with turkey, pies, everything traditional, just without all this fuss, plus, spa, hiking, relaxation, everything you need." I looked around the table, feeling irritation slowly begin to rise in my chest. "That sounds expensive," I said calmly. There was silence, sticky, hollow, filled with the clink of forks, as if these were the only sounds that could be allowed right now. I gave them a few seconds before asking the question directly. "So you're asking if I want to join you?" "Because I've already said that I'm going to have to work this week," Jessica immediately said, quickly and almost joyfully. "Oh, we know you won't be able to go. That's why we decided that now is the perfect time. You won't be upset that you're missing an opportunity, will you?" I put my fork on the edge of my plate and looked at my sister carefully. "If you all know that I won't be able to go, then why tell me about this vacation?" I asked, and again there was silence, this time even more awkward. I suddenly understood, everything became clear. I looked at them, and not a single note trembled in my voice. "Do you want me to pay, right?" Mom, as if on command, leaned across the table and lightly touched my arm. Her voice became almost pleading. "Don't pay. Just a little help. We all need a break, Tori. This year has been so hard." I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes for a moment, holding back the outburst of anger that was rising like a wave before a collapse. "Do you want me to pay for a vacation that I'm not even going on?" I asked slowly. "You can afford it," Jessica interjected, and there was a familiar note of superiority in her voice, the same one with which she had once chosen my bridesmaid dress. "We all know how much you earn." "That's not the point," I replied, feeling an internal pressure pressing down on my temples. "The thing is, you're asking me to pay for a luxury vacation for 4 adults, none of whom pays a cent for a roof over their heads, electricity, water, or groceries." Dad said his favorite thing again, "We are a family," as if those words were supposed to magically override common sense. "My mother and I are no longer young," he added. "We deserve to enjoy our golden years, and Ryan and I are still recovering." Jessica interjected, "It may be years before we get back on our feet." I looked at each of them in turn, at my mother, whose face was sculpted out of feigned calm, at my father, who tried to look neutral, but there was an approving resignation in his eyes to Jessica's plan, at Ryan, barely restraining his impatience, and at Jessica herself, with her cold confidence that everything was back again. It will be as she intended. And at that moment, looking at them, I realized one thing. These people, who in theory should have been a support, love, and family, see in me only a convenient tool, an ATM with a voice, a plate, and a car that drives into the store and pays for everyone. "No," I said, calmly, clearly, without a shadow of doubt, "I won't pay for your vacation. If you want to go to the resort for Thanksgiving, you'll have to pay for it yourself." Jessica tried to seize the initiative, her voice became harsh. "But we can't afford it." "Then you won't be able to go," I interrupted, not giving her time for a new round of arguments. "That's how money works. If you can't afford something, you don't get it." Ryan, who had been silent until then, suddenly perked up, His face contorted with indignation. "It's selfish," he blurted out, "after everything your family has done for you." I raised my eyebrows and smiled bitterly, but I was laughing without joy, without a sound. "What exactly have you done for me lately?" I asked, feeling an icy irritation begin to build up inside. "You live in my house, you eat the food I pay for, you take advantage of my generosity, and you do it every single day, so please don't start talking about everything you've done for me." "We raised you," Mom intervened, and her voice was trembling. I couldn't figure out if it was from real emotions or because she was already tired of repeating this phrase. "We sacrificed for you. And I've been paying off this debt for months," I replied, without raising my voice, "but I'm not going to spend my money on a luxury resort that I won't even go to." The rest of the dinner was spent in complete silence, the same prickly, tense silence that drowns out even the clatter of forks on plates. When I finished, I apologized briefly, got up from the table and went to my room, carefully but deliberately locking the door behind me. I could hear muffled, angry voices behind the wall below, arguing, reproaches, discontent, everything that they did not dare to pour into my face, but could not contain inside. I turned on the TV and turned it up until their voices were lost in the noise of a comedy series. The next morning, no one said a word to me. I made breakfast for myself, as always, and went to work without hearing a single good morning or have a good day. I threw myself into my work, focusing on a major project that I was overseeing in my company, a presentation for a new corporate client, on which many hopes were pinned. I started staying late at the office, making up any excuse not to return to the house, which had become a toxic refuge. This has become my new routine. Early risers, late comebacks, brief, detached conversations, or the complete absence of them. It was as if I wasn't living with my family, but with strangers who had settled with me temporarily, but for a long time. The days passed, the tension in the house was building up like steam under the lid of an old kettle. No one spoke to me directly, but as soon as I entered the room, I felt like the conversation had just ended. Sometimes I heard whispers, and when they noticed my presence, they stopped so abruptly that the silence rang. It was evening, a week before Thanksgiving. I stayed in the office longer than usual, trying to finish the project, too tired to think about anything but charts and deadlines. When everything was finished, the last slide animation remained on the screen, and I looked at the clock. It was almost midnight. The office was already empty, even the cleaners had come and gone, leaving behind the smell of cleaning products and smooth stripes on the carpets. I was exhausted. All I wanted to do was go home, take a hot shower, and collapse into bed. On the way home, I drove through dark, deserted streets, and this piece outside the window seemed to become a mirror of my own devastation. When I arrived at the house, I immediately noticed that not a single light was on inside. I decided that everyone was already asleep, and to be honest, it was a relief. I wasn't ready for another scene, for another evening of stares and hidden reproaches. Going to the door, I took out a bunch of keys, felt the familiar metallic chill, inserted the key into the lock, and it didn't turn. I frowned, pulled out the key, inserted it again, and shook it gently, as I had done dozens of times. Nothing. I pulled it out and held it up to the porch light, making sure that I was holding my key, the one I always carried in my bag, which I had used to open this house since I took it off almost 2 years ago. And then it hit me, they changed the locks. For a moment, I just stood there, trying to make sense of it, until a wave began to rise from inside, not heat, not fear, but pure anger, as if someone had punched me in the gut. I started knocking on the door, not holding back the force, demanding that someone come out and explain what was going on. There was no response. I pressed the doorbell and held my finger down until the soft, melodious ringing turned into a nasty, incessant sound that shook the night. I knew they were inside, and still no one opened it, but then I saw movement behind the curtain. Someone was at home, someone was looking at me. I felt it with every cell of my body, the same anxious tremor that appears when people look at you from the dark without making a sound. I knocked on the door, no longer shy about either the force or the volume. "I know you're there," I said loudly and firmly. "Open the door right now." There was no response, there was only silence, dull and indifferent, as if I was knocking on the wall instead of the door. I stepped back and looked up at the second floor, where my parents' bedroom was, and suddenly I noticed, the light in the window flashed on, as if someone standing behind the switch had changed his mind about hiding. For a moment, the blinds opened slightly, and I caught movement, a silhouette, feminine, familiar, then the darkness. At that moment, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I took it out with icy fingers, and the screen lit up with a dim blue light. Message, from my mom: "We won't let you in until you agree to pay for our vacation. It's for your own good, Olivia. You need to learn to be less selfish." I read this, unable to believe, unable to fully comprehend what had already happened. My own family, the people I supported, fed, and restrained, locked me behind the door in my own house, in a rented house that I paid for, in which I provided them with shelter, in order to extort money from me, for my own good. I could have called the police. I had a lease signed in my name. This house was rightfully mine, albeit temporarily, but I didn't call. Something stopped me. Maybe it's the last shadow of a naive hope that a family is more than an arrangement on the verge of exploitation, or maybe it was just fatigue, so deep that even rage couldn't overcome it. I went back to the car, started the engine, turned the heat up to maximum, and tried to get into the driver's seat somehow. Sleep came and went like a tide, in short waves punctuated by chills as I turned off the engine so as not to burn the rest of the gasoline. Through the glass, I watched the dawn coming. The lights in the house came on, figures began to move behind the thin curtains, and the usual morning chores began. Someone was making coffee, someone was taking a shower, someone was arguing about something in the kitchen. And all this time I was sitting in the car, shivering, unwashed, with numb hands, like a stranger on my own doorstep. Around 7 in the evening, the front door opened, and Mom came out onto the porch, with that same smile that made my stomach clench. I rolled down the window just enough to hear her voice. "Did you have time to think about our conversation?" she asked with a polite intonation, as if she hadn't walked me through the night in a cold car. I nodded, and suddenly everything that had been muddy, blurry, and tedious became clear. My head was clearer than ever. "Yes," I said, "there is." Her face lit up with anticipation. She once again became the woman who, as a child, rubbed her hands before handing Jessica another gift. "Good, then you can go back." I got out of the car, stretched my shoulders, pressed into the seat, and silently followed her. Inside, Dad, Jessica, and Ryan were sitting at the kitchen table, munching on something for breakfast. They looked up at me and met me with an expression that made my stomach clench, a mixture of fake anxiety and unabashed triumph. "Good morning, Sonia," Jessica chuckled. "Do you want pancakes?" I didn't answer. She walked past, without looking at anyone, into her room and carefully closed the door behind her. I called my boss and, without going into details, said that I needed to take time off for family reasons. He was very understanding. I rarely asked for anything. I was listening. I could hear doors slamming in the house, floorboards creaking, my family gathering, putting on jackets, and rustling keys. One by one, they went out. Dad and Mom go to their odd jobs, Jessica and Ryan, who knows where. At 9 in the morning, the house was empty. I came out of hiding. She went to the closet, opened it, and took out the suitcases, the ones she hadn't touched since her last vacation. I began to pack my things, slowly, methodically. Clothes, only the most necessary, toiletries, documents, but the most important thing was not the objects, but the sense of determination with which I took out of the drawer an old box with photographs, several letters left over from my grandmother, and jewelry that a friend once gave me for Christmas. Everything else, I told myself, could be replaced, everything except self-respect. I picked up the phone and called the landlord. He answered immediately, with a slight worry in his voice. "Is something wrong with the house?" he asked. "No," I replied, "it's family issues, I need to move out." I briefly explained the situation to the landlord, omitting the most painful, humiliating details that still weighed heavily somewhere under his ribs, unwilling to let go. I didn't want to go into the gist of it, to tell how I was kicked out of my own home under the pretext of family education, as if I were not an adult woman with a job and the right to personal space, but a stubborn girl who needed to be taught proper behavior. I just said that circumstances had arisen that required my immediate departure. The contract, as it turned out, provided for the termination of the lease with 30 days' notice, but I assured him that I was ready to pay for the next month if he would allow me to leave immediately. His response struck me as simple and kind. "Leave them until the end of the month if you want, I'll take care of it later, no penalty." I thanked him, struggling to find the words that could convey the strange mixture of relief and gratitude that was now filling my chest. "Could you do me another favor?" I asked after a short pause. Could you tell them yourself? I would prefer not to start this conversation, he immediately agreed, with the same calm delicacy, as if it was not the first time he had dealt with broken family ties. I'll come by this afternoon, he promised. Immediately after the call, I started packing suitcases, documents, a favorite sweater with loose thread, a paperback book that I reread when I couldn't sleep, everything that could fit in the car. I packed quickly, without unnecessary sentimentality. For the furniture and remaining items, I called a temporary storage warehouse and rented a small room, and then I wrote to Emma, my friend from university. The only person whose presence has always felt like support, not a burden, she responded. Almost instantly, offering me her guest room and adding, as much as you need, at least forever. I left by noon, no goodbyes, no notes, no keys left in a saucer by the door. I didn't leave anything I couldn't live without, and as I left Meadowbrook, leaving the house behind me, where I was reminded of my duty every day, I felt a strange, almost unusual lightness. For the first time in a long time, maybe in my entire adult life, I felt a weight lifted from my shoulders, not responsibilities, no, but expectations, constant, sticky, relentless. I didn't owe anyone anything anymore, no support, no money, no explanation. But, of course, that didn't mean they just disappeared. That evening, my phone started vibrating with annoying regularity, as if someone was holding their finger on the call button. The messages came one after another, from her mother, from Jessica, even from her father, who usually avoided technology. At first, they were accusations. How could you? You abandoned your family, we have nowhere to go. Then there were tears, pleas, and long, incoherent messages in which they begged, promised, and said that everything would change. I read the first few, but with each word, I felt not empathy, but fatigue rising in me, the one, deep as a chasm, from which you no longer want to pull out someone else's guilt. I turned off my phone, and the next morning, when I returned to the office, I turned it on just for the sake of work calls. But that didn't stop them. Around noon, the receptionist came down to me and whispered, "Your family came to see you." There was sympathy and a slight tension in her voice. I went out into the lobby and saw them, my mother, with traces of tears, my father with his hand on his chest, as if his heart was bursting, Jessica, feigning fear, as if she still hoped that she could go back, if only she chose the right words. I took them outside, into the cold wind, not wanting to make a scene inside. They talked in unison, interrupting each other, promised to fix everything, begged me to come back, assured me that they had nowhere else to go, that the owner would kick them out, that mom had insomnia, and dad had blood pressure. I stood and listened, but it all seemed to be happening behind glass. Their faces moved, their voices sounded, but nothing came through. Everything that had previously caused pity now caused only amazement. How far can a person go if he thinks for a long time that everyone owes him? When they finally ran out of steam, I looked at them with a kind of new calmness that surprised even me. "You chose this," I said softly but confidently. "You locked me in my own house, forced me to sleep in the car to get money from me. Now you can do the same thing, find a place to spend the night." Like then, just the opposite, and I turned around without waiting for an answer, without looking back, because I knew that if I looked into my mother's eyes, she would try to cling to pity again. 2 weeks later, I moved into a new apartment, in a different neighborhood, in a different rhythm of life, a spacious studio with a large window and silence that was not disturbed by other people's screams. I changed my phone number and blocked everyone on social media. The landlord confirmed that the family had left, but he didn't specify where, and I didn't want to know. For the first time in years, I was alone, for real, and, surprisingly, I wasn't scared. No one to please, no dinners that no one will appreciate, no sleepless nights from the sound of other people's voices behind the wall. My savings began to grow. The money that used to go to food for 5 people now went to my future fund. Maybe I'll even be able to afford my own place sooner than I thought. Sometimes, very rarely, I found myself wondering if I was being too tough. Maybe we should have talked again, given them a chance, and been patient. But then I remembered that night in the car, the cold, the shiver, the humiliation. I remembered the years when I was always in second place, always on the sidelines, always in Jessica's shadow, and then I knew, no, I made the right choice.